Hey, Raising Beaut Kids. This book's not out, okay? This is out in September. If you think you might like this book, you've got to do a job. You've got to email me. My email is mark@marklemessurier.com.au. You can Google me and find it anyway. It's easy. And if I get an email from you and it says, Mark, I think I might like your new book because I enjoyed the workshop today, I'll put you on a mailing list, and I'll let you know when it's ready. It should be ready in September. I'm writing it with a dear, dear friend of mine and a colleague that I work with by the name of Bill Hansbury, who does excellent work around Australia in schools in restorative justice. And he has a very specialised practice in working with dyslexic kids because he actually uses a gold standard Hickey approach, a multi-sensory approach to work with kids. And there are gold standard approaches out there. We've written this book together, Raising Beaut Kids, and it's, I guess, why did we write it? Because parenting's tricky, because children begin life, they're usually impulsive. Well, probably not yours, but most of other people's are. They're usually impulsive, they're self-motivated, they need to have their way, and it's part of a survival technique, isn't it? And they put a lot of pressure on parents, and they demand from parents good judgement, good leadership. And if you're not always in that right space, oh, jingos, it's really hard to show good judgement and good leadership. The book that we've decided to write together is going to look a bit like, excuse me, going to look a bit like a cookbook. And we've sort of set it up cookbook style, so we've got a lovely emotive topic. We've got the lovely cookbook picture, which is quite emotive. We've got the ingredients that fires up this emotive topic. And then we've decided to write a recipe rescue. Have you thought of? Have you thought of? Have you thought of? Today, I want to just do the introduction with you. And the introduction is basically an orientation about your parenting style. I'll get to that in a minute. Do you want a sneak preview of the contents? All right. The art of managing tricky kid behaviour. How do I do that? Oh, Mark, would you just get back up on your chair? I'm just tired of you getting off your chair all the time while we're meant to be eating dinner together. It just drives us crazy. How many times do I have to tell you? Well, I've just made sure that Mark will continue to do that because I've just made sure that I've rewarded Mark's behaviour. Mark's indiscriminate. Little Mark is indiscriminate about getting attention, and I'm teaching little Mark, that's your place in our family. You're the annoying little idiot. And I love you, and you know that I love you because I'm your dad and you drive me bonkers, and I'm reinforcing that that's the way that you're loved in our family. That's right. That's another workshop I could come back for. So you've got to be really careful you do not accidentally reward the negative behaviour that you're trying to extinguish. And many of us fall for that trick because we're just over it and we're just tired of it, but we're not actually doing behaviour change. We're actually reinforcing what we don't want. So how do I catch and build positive behaviours in kids? That's another chapter. Oh, rules. How do I make the best rules and get the best from them? Cranky kids in the back of the car, they drive me crazy. Get off that computer now. How long do you expect me to wait? Dressing dilemmas, manners, are they for our kids or are they just old-fashioned? Toddler to teenage tantrums, chores and pocket money, navigating the morning madness with the kids, how do I get out of the house on time, mealtime mayhem, fights over food, gee whiz, I want $1 for every time someone comes into my room and has a consult over food and dinner time. You know, I got a really simple solution to that, but a lot of people don't want to hear the simple solution because it's actually too easy. How can I, in a practical way, help to build my children's emotional resilience? And when my kids fight, is it normal that kids fight so much? What do I do at that point? So there are some of the chapters that we've got. I guess our aim is to connect families and to connect parents and kids so that they understand that kids' behaviour is often driven for deep reasons that kind of on the surface we often can't read very easily, and often we respond to the behaviour that we see on the surface without examining what the emotional interplay or the psychological interplay is down a bit lower. So I want you to take a bit of a challenge with me today, and this next bit will actually get a little bit scary, I reckon, because do you ever ask yourself, catch yourself asking the big questions like, oh, what kind of relationship did I dream to have with my kids? What kind of relationship have I got with them? Am I living the dream that I had? If I'm not, how do I tweak it so I can live that dream? Do I lead the way at home by actually showing the kinds of behaviours that I want the kids to have? Or do I bark and do I bite at them, but I expect them to be patient, kind, caring, obedient and responsible? Am I constantly nitpicking and reprimanding at the kids when their behaviour isn't right? Am I too lenient with my kids? Do I want to be their friend rather than a mother or a father showing leadership? And what kinds of behaviours do I give my attention to from my kids? And am I giving the right attention for the right reasons? Am I rewarding the behaviours I want to see more of? Is my parenting style permissive? Is it overbearing? Is it neglectful? Or is it decisive and fair? And does my style seem to swing from situation to situation? Am I a three-headed monster at home, but a really lovely person in public? I want to cast a spotlight on us today, so we'll get to the kids, but just for a moment, the spotlight's going on us. In the beginning, as we prepare to be a parent, it all seems so natural. We're in the right age bracket, usually. Our friends are starting to have children. We're getting questions from our family about, when do you think you'll be having children? And there's this social pressure that you feel about having children. And then there's a biological clock, and everything's working really well, and the rest just follows. And it doesn't take long, does it? It doesn't take long after you have kids to realise this is wonderful, but these little devils are the biggest challenge I've ever had in my whole life. They press buttons that nobody else at work can manage to even find. And we learn really quickly from our kids a few things. We learn that our kids press buttons that teach us stuff about ourselves. They teach us about our frailties. Oh, they teach us about our bad temper. They teach us about our worries and our anxieties. They teach us about our fears that are really deep-seated about living and life. They teach us about our dreams and our hopes. They also teach us about our lost opportunities. And they can sometimes drive us to give our kids all the solutions because we don't want our kids to miss out on opportunities. And by putting an old head on their young shoulders, we'll make sure that they grow up okay. But the truth is, in a situation like this, you know you can't put old heads on young shoulders. Kids have to learn through experience. So for me, being a parent, and for the book that Bill and I have written together, Raising Beaut Kids, it's all about being a parent is a human being's greatest test. It's joyful, but it's testing. And if we're in the right space, and this is what I want to do today, if we're in the right space, boy, from this test we can learn so much about ourselves. We don't need to go back to school, back to university. We can do a lot of growth by just parenting and keeping our head in the right space. So I thought To get us into this zone together, I would introduce to you the social control window. And the social control window looks at how you manage other people. Annette, for fun, could look at how she manages her staff as a manager through this window. Some of you who are wearing multiple hats could look at how you manage the people that you might work with rather than looking at your kids. But today, in this workshop, I'll be looking at how parents might choose to use this model as they work with their kids. If you're here as a teacher, you could put on your teaching hat for a little while too. Split your personality. It's pretty easy to do by this time of the year. Everyone's falling apart and they've got multiple personalities. What you can see is 4 different boxes or 4 windows, and these represent 4 leadership styles. The left-hand axis or the y-axis is the degree of firmness you parent with. Are you highly structured? Then you'd be up near the top. The boundaries, the limits, the accountability you expect from your kids. And down the bottom, you've got fairness. In other words, how well or how poorly do you nurture? How much do you give out to your kids so they can actually see who you are and you can see who they are and you build a tight relationship? Well, just before I start, I don't want you to think of good and bad as we do this. I just want you to think of 4 management styles, because I'll guarantee that all of us move through all of these windows. Sometimes when we're really unsteady, you know, in the space of 2 or 3 minutes. But generally what I want you to look for, what is your gut instinctive style? Because we're not sure where our styles come from when you really think about it. Have you got a style that you learnt from your parents? Is that how you're parenting? And it worked relatively well for you, so you're applying the same style to your kids because you figure it should work relatively well for them. Or were your parents hopeless and their style was so appalling you've decided to backflip and you've invented a whole new reverse style so it's going to work a whole lot better for your kids and your kids won't miss out on what you missed out on? Or are there a series of authors or parenting books that you've methodically read over the years? It's really interesting where our parenting comes from. This should help you. So let's start in this window. You're in authority. You've got to be the boss. You have to have the final say, and you know how to deliver the final say with a sting in your tail. Oh, you're strict, you're demanding, you're controlling, but have you noticed you're really low on the emotional support and the empathy towards your kids? You have in past literature been described as a brick wall parent, a punitive parent. You love your kids, absolutely you do. Every one of the parents who works in one of these quadrants loves their kids. And you are demanding of high standards. You've been accused of being a tiger mum. You've been accused of being a tiger dad because you're constantly insisting on the 3 R's, publicly and privately, from your kids: right, respect, responsibility. And you keep the lid on their wayward behaviour all the time, and you closely supervise their every thought. You control their friendships, you control their school activities, and you push them in directions that you know will be best for them even though they don't know it yet. And you do it all for their benefit. You've learnt to trot out emotionally confronting phrases when things go a little pear-shaped. You say things like, you must, you will, oh you won't, I want it. Hey, I want that now. How many times do I need to ask you? If you make me ask you one more time, you will lose. Don't you dare. Sometimes your sense of disapproval from friends and relations about the way in which you manage your kids is quite obvious, but you turn a blind eye to it because you think in your mind, they don't know my children like I do. They don't see what I do. They haven't got the special insights into my children as I do. And when things go wrong at home, just as they do for all of us, your attention is on what went wrong, finding the culprit, and finding a way to let them feel your disapproval. And sometimes you don't use consequences, but you tell people you do. You use revenge. You regularly hear yourself saying, whose fault was that? Who's to blame? What's the right punishment? You take on the role of detective, judge and executioner. And rarely does the consequence concern how others or relationships might have been hurt or harmed, and how that person might fix or repair those relationships. And sadly, those people who fundamentally manage in the punitive box, they make their kids very nervy, or in fact, they teach their kids to become very rebellious and very oppositional. And by the time their kids get to 15 years of age, those parents, using just those tools, have taught those kids the very same tools, and the kids, being taught by experts, become better than the parents. All right, let's move to neglectful. Well, you offer little support and guidance for the kids. You're unavailable to give the kids the love and the attention that they need. And kids actually do need love and attention to feel secure and to attach to families and to attach to parents. You're not strict. You're not really emotionally responsive. Actually, nothing much is happening between you and the kids at all. Now, look, you love them, of course you do. But they just take more time, more emotion, more effort than you've actually got available at the moment. And to be fair, there could be good reasons for this. You may be struggling with poor health, relationship issues, depression, alcohol abuse, substance addictions, or perhaps you're overwhelmed by impossible financial pressures. And this naturally puts us in a really bad space. And if you do have loads of money, rather than giving your kids time and your affection, you shower them with trinkets, you shower them with gifts, and you hope that the steady supply of material possessions will fill up the gap. But there's only one thing that can fill the gap, and you know that this morning as I'm speaking, and it's your time, and it's your commitment, and it's your care, and it's your relationship. Even worse, you might have a wildly mistaken belief that if you drag your kids up and you treat them tough, you prepare them for a tough life. Or even grimmer, you may be contending with a genuinely disconnected personality and you just don't get nurturance. You just don't get close emotional contact. Now, I know what you're thinking at this point. You've all taken the high moral ground, haven't you? Well, that's certainly not me. That's certainly not what happens in my family. Well, what about last Sunday afternoon, after you'd spent Friday night at some school function, most of Saturday running around to sports events for the kids, a compulsory in-law visit that you had to do on a Saturday night, something then that you had to do on a Sunday and you couldn't wiggle out of it, and then you were trapped at home for 4 hours trying to do a mountain load worth of jobs while the kids were killing each other in the backyard, but you let them go. That's neglectful. That's okay. None of us can actually take the moral high ground ever. Okay, that's still there. And look, thanks for laughing, because the point that I'm trying to make today, no good, no bad, just be mindful of where you are at any time when you're managing your kids. It's such an easy model to work with. And I guess there are two questions that I'd always want you to ask yourself. Which window do I feel like I'm in at the moment? Which is really great, I feel like. And which window should I move to get an outcome that'll be productive for my child, productive for our relationship, and productive in terms of them learning something. Moving on. Oh, no. I know you... Did anyone jump to that moral high ground? No, none of you. She's very balanced. Or you're just big fat fibbers. Certainly, There is no judgment here, but one of the things that we do look at very carefully is that we've got to be aware that kids who don't feel connected to families, kids who have parents who are constantly distant and can't build a relationship with them, do look elsewhere to build relationships. So they will look eventually away from the family, sometimes in places that you wished they wouldn't look. Permissive. In the literature over the years, you've been described as a jellyfish parent or a permissive parent. Look, you actually do something really well. Just check that out, okay? You offer loads of care, support and encouragement. You are a great nurturer. You're wonderful. Uh-oh. But there's one thing that's not so good. You don't have consistent structures in their lives, rules, routines, consistent expectations about how things should work around home. Instead, you serve them with an easygoing, lenient, friendshipy style. That's right, you've got the word relationship and friendship confused. They're kind of different. In fact, quietly to a few people, you will admit that your kids are probably the best friends that you ever dreamt of. You become their most fervent supporter, and heaven help anyone, a principal, a teacher, somebody in the community who steps in your way. You will be a protector for your children, and you will tell that person where to get off. Reminds me of a friend of mine who was at a coffee shop recently